The rain that night didn't just fall, it hammered the small town like it had something to prove. Cold, heavy sheets slammed against the cracked windows of Daniel Carter's little rental house, the wind whistling through the gaps in the frame as if mocking the thin insulation. Daniel sat hunched over the kitchen table, a steaming mug of instant coffee in front of him and an unpaid electric bill in his hand. His hands were rough from years of warehouse work, his nails permanently stained with grease. At 32, he looked older than his age, not because of the gray streaks starting to show in his brown hair, but because of the tired heaviness in his eyes. The clock read 8:42 p.m. His 8-year-old son, Jacob, was in his small bedroom, working on homework under the dim light of a second-hand desk lamp. Daniel took another sip of coffee, the bitter taste filling his mouth. His back ached from the double shift he'd just finished, but there was no time for rest. In 3 days, rent was due, and his savings account had less than the cost of a full tank of gas. A loud, rapid knock at the door jolted him. It wasn't the kind of polite tap you'd expect from a neighbor, it was urgent, desperate. Daniel froze for a moment, then stood, the old wooden floor creaking under his weight. When he opened the door, the cold air slapped him in the face, along with the sight of 2 little girls standing in the downpour. They were identical, maybe 7 years old, both with long chestnut hair plastered to their cheeks from the rain, their blue eyes wide and frightened. They wore thin cardigans over dresses that were clearly not meant for winter weather. One clutched a small stuffed rabbit, its fur worn thin, while the other kept glancing nervously over her shoulder into the darkness. "Please, can we come in?" the one with the stuffed rabbit whispered, her voice trembling. Daniel's first instinct was suspicion. He didn't know these kids, and there was no sign of an adult nearby. But then he looked closer at their pale faces, at the way their lips trembled from the cold, and whatever hesitation he had vanished. "Come on," he said, stepping aside. "You're freezing." The girls shuffled inside, dripping water onto the faded carpet. Daniel shut the door against the howling wind and quickly grabbed 2 towels from the laundry pile. "What's your names?" he asked, kneeling down to their level as he draped the towels over their shoulders. "I'm Lily," said the first girl softly. "This is my sister, Rose." "Lily and Rose," Daniel repeated, trying to keep his voice gentle. "Where's your mom or dad?" They exchanged a glance that made Daniel's stomach tighten. Rose looked down at her wet shoes and mumbled, We can't find him." That was all they offered. No explanation, no detail, just that. He gave them warm cocoa and had Jacob bring out his extra blankets. The 3 children ended up sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, sipping their drinks while Daniel reheated some leftover pasta. He couldn't stop watching the twins. Their manners were oddly polite, their speech almost formal for their age, but there was an undercurrent of fear in every glance they exchanged. It wasn't until Jacob went to bed that Lily finally spoke again. She was curled up on the couch, her sister asleep beside her, the stuffed rabbit pressed between them. "We were supposed to wait for him at the park," she whispered, almost too quietly to hear. "But he didn't come." Daniel leaned forward. "Your dad?" She nodded. "He said he'd be right back." But it got dark, and cold. Something in Daniel's chest tightened. He'd been abandoned once as a kid, his own father had walked out when he was 9, leaving his mother to work 3 jobs. He recognized the look in Lily's eyes because he'd worn it himself once. "You can stay here tonight," he said firmly. "Tomorrow, we'll figure it out." Morning came with pale sunlight filtering through the curtains and the smell of frying eggs. Daniel had just set plates on the table when there was a sharp, deliberate knock at the door, not frantic like last night, but heavy, confident, as if the person on the other side owned the world. When he opened it, he found himself face to face with a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a high-end magazine. Tall, broad-shouldered, with perfectly styled dark hair and an overcoat that probably cost more than Daniel's monthly rent. His steel-gray eyes swept over Daniel quickly before focusing past him, toward the living room. "I believe you have my daughters," the man said in a deep, controlled voice. Daniel blinked. "Your daughters?" "Lily and Rose," the man replied, stepping inside without waiting for permission. The twins, still in their blankets, gasped and ran to him. He knelt to wrap them in his arms, his composure breaking just enough to reveal genuine relief. Daniel stood there, stunned. He'd imagined a neglectful father or some shady figure, not someone who looked like he had an army of lawyers and a private jet on standby. The man stood, still holding the girl's hands. "My name is Alexander Ford," he said. "And I owe you an explanation, and perhaps more than that." That was the moment Daniel's life began to change.